Today we are in Wallace County, Kansas, home to the highest point in the state. Hi, I'm Skye Marthaler. Welcome to another episode of Rooftops of America. Today, we're in Skye, Kansas, just a few short miles from the highest point in the state. Located in the far western section of the state, near the Colorado border, Mount Sunflower is part of the Great Plains that stretch across North America, from Canada to Mexico. The high point is named in honor of the Kansas state nickname, the Sunflower State. So this particular part of the Great Plains is known as the High Plains, and they make up about the western third of Kansas. So over the period of several million years, the sediment and erosion from the Rocky Mountains came in, filled up the river valleys, smoothed out the hills, and what you get is the landscape you see here today. The High Plains are suitably named because while it may look relatively flat, you are closer to a mile up in elevation than to sea level. If you were to drive a car from eastern Kansas to the Colorado border, you'd be steadily climbing in elevation several thousand feet. So this state is known to be fairly flat, but that reputation isn't wholly deserved. Recently, 2 Kansas geographers crunched the numbers, and they found out it wasn't even in the top 5 flattest states in the country. Though, with that said, this high point only has a prominence of 19 feet. Western Kansas has a dry, semi-arid climate, and it receives less precipitation than other parts of the state. The vegetation has adapted to meet this demanding environment. This here is shortgrass prairie, and it makes up a substantial part of the High Plains. At one point, this region would have been covered with herds of bison, pronghorn, and other wildlife. As people migrated here, the nature of the land changed more to ranching and agriculture, notably in wheat. These new elements would have a huge impact on the land. By the end of the 19th century, agriculture in the United States was modernizing and wielding the full might of the Industrial Revolution. The American farmer was becoming the most productive agricultural force in the world. With new technology at hand, previously untouched areas were now thought to be the next boom for cultivation. So the problem actually was twofold. The first was the deep plowing technique used at the time to plant crops. This is something that farmers had used in the eastern U.S. for a long time. But when it was applied to this region, it did substantial damage to the grass and the ground cover, effectively destroying it. The funny thing was that stayed hidden, and the impact wasn't truly felt. High yields and plentiful rain meant everything appeared to be great. The second factor was weather. By the early 1930s, the Great Plains were hit with the worst drought the region had seen in 300 years. With the removal of the ground cover by deep plowing, the sustained drought, combined with the windiness of the region, created the dust storms that would soon roll across the plains. The destruction of the shortgrass prairie would lead to one of the largest American environmental disasters of the 20th century, an event known as the Dust Bowl. In 1931, the first of the black blizzards would hit, and this area would be ravaged for the next 8 years. By 1940, over 100 million acres would be affected, and more than 2.5 million people would flee the impacted areas. Tons of topsoil would be lifted up and transported hundreds of miles, some as far as the Atlantic Ocean. Even today, effects of the disaster are still being felt. Agricultural levels in this area have never quite recovered to their pre-Dust Bowl days, and the event has left a long and lasting impression on the American psyche. The Harold family, who owns this land, survived these events. They homesteaded this area over 110 years ago. In 1941, they purchased the pasture in which the high point is on. But it wasn't until 1961 when the U.S. Geological Survey designated this the highest point in Kansas. To get to the high point, it's just a short half-mile hike down this road behind me.
Let's go check it out.
Remember to be respectful when you visit. This is still a working cattle ranch, and it is a privilege to be allowed access.
And here we are at the summit of Mount Sunflower. Coming in at 4,039 feet makes this the 28th highest state high point in the U.S. I'm Skye Marthaler. Thanks for joining me on another episode of Rooftops of America. We'll see you soon. Thank you.